Justin Trudeau is the most hated world leader today, and that is worse than it sounds considering we have got Vladimir Putin, holding an entire continent on gunpoint. People across political ideologies are angry at Trudeau for how he handled the truckers' protest. The Conservatives are angry because they don't like the Liberals, obviously. What is more interesting is that many global liberals are also angry at Trudeau because they feel that his undemocratic handling of protests has undermined their moral high ground in front of conservatives, which is true, and I'll get back to it in the last part of the video. Meanwhile, I'd like to argue that in this whole situation, the truckers are actually wrong and Trudeau is on the right side. The tactic used by the Freedom Convoy 2022 of blocking Canada's capital with trucks for nearly 3 weeks is directly inspired from the 2021 farmers' protests in India, in which millions of farmers from North India blocked India's capital New Delhi for nearly 1 year. Back then, I wrote a blog headed "A Study in Modern Protests" and concluded that the tactics and strategies used by the farmers' protests in India will be copied across the globe. Since then, I've been waiting for something like this to happen in another part of the world. And it is more than just a coincidence that this tactic was copied in Canada. The significant presence of Punjabis in both the truckers' protests in Canada as well as in the anti-farm protests in India last year confirms that the Freedom Convoy was directly inspired from the protests in New Delhi. However, despite having similar strategies and tactics, the blockade by farmers in India can be justified, but the blockade by truckers in Ottawa is totally unjustifiable, simply because the demands made by farmers were far more important than what these truckers are asking for. The blockade by farmers in India for nearly an year is understandable because the new farm laws could have significantly altered the agriculture business in India, possibly reducing incomes of millions of small farmers and forcing them to sell their lands. For Indians, it was a matter of life and death, and this is one of the reasons why the protests lasted for a year. In comparison, the demands made by the Freedom Convoy are trivial. Laying siege on a country's capital is unacceptable. For weak demands like being fed up of COVID mandates and exemptions from vaccination for just a couple of hundred truckers, the blockade of Ottawa was an overkill. Instead, the truckers could have just parked 4 to 5 trucks on Parliament Hill to express their protest. If the Trudeau government still would not have listened, then the truckers could have gone on strike until their demands were met. The truckers' method of protest was excessive compared to the importance of their demands, and therefore cannot be justified. Many people are criticizing Trudeau for being incompetent and allowing the protest to grow so big and take Ottawa hostage. In his defense, Justin Trudeau could not have predicted that the Freedom Convoy could have grown so big so fast, since such protests are a rarity in Canada. But when truckers settled inside Ottawa, Trudeau must have definitely realized that these protests could go on for a long time, just like it did in India. Direct support from Donald Trump and American right-wingers, along with millions of dollars in donations and smuggling of arms and ammunition from America, are good enough reasons for Trudeau to assume that these protests could go out of control, leading to violence. For those reasons, the Canadian government invoking the Emergencies Act is understandable. But the biggest mistake Trudeau made that is costing him a lot is that he tried to politicize these protests, in which he miserably failed. Justin Trudeau, in order to show himself as the white knight of liberal values, branded the protesters as extreme right, Nazi-supporting, Trump-following, anti-vaccination, white fringe minority dragon. Little did he realize that the protest had quickly grown from an anti-vax protest to a people's protest who were fed up of Canada's COVID mandates. Canadians from all walks of life were participating in it, vax or no vax. As a result, Trudeau's comments backfired, making him the villain. Moreover, Trudeau's unwillingness to negotiate with truckers before imposing an emergency made him look like more of a dictator than a leader of a democracy. To be honest, Trudeau made a big deal out of something that is essentially nothing. If you closely look at the protesters' demands, you will realize that they are actually very reasonable. On 15th of January, when the protest started, nearly 80% of people were fully vaccinated in Canada and 60% in USA. Extending the date of compulsory vaccination to convince unvaccinated truckers was not a big deal. Similarly, there should have been no problems in easing COVID mandates since the virus is not as deadly as it used to be. Many European countries have already eased their mandates. Even though I'm totally on Trudeau's side in this one, His response to the Freedom Convoy reveals that he is still an amateur politician. The biggest letdown Justin Trudeau has been is to his own supporters. Trudeau's double standards towards protests in India and Canada, as well as the dictatorial manner in which he tried to stop the truckers, has not only humiliated liberals in front of the world, but also spoiled democratic principles. In 2020, Justin Trudeau had this to say about farmers' protests in India.
Let me remind you, Canada will always be there to defend the right of peaceful protest. We believe in the importance of dialogue, and that's why.
The same year, he was seen openly supporting the George Floyd Black Lives Matter protests in Canada that had caused huge violence in Donald Trump's America. And this year, when people started protesting against him, he had this to say.
The blockades and occupations are illegal. They're a threat to our economy and relationship with trading partners. They're a threat to supply chains and the availability of essential goods like food and medicine. They're a threat to public safety.
Left liberals are often accused of being elite hypocrites, and Justin Trudeau proved exactly that. Canada ranks 5th on Democracy Index, and Justin Trudeau is glorified as the Superman of democracy. So the manner in which the Canadian government has handled these protests has set global standards. Justin Trudeau not only froze the bank accounts of the people who were protesting, but he also froze the bank accounts of innocent people who were just financially supporting the protests. Frankly, these kinds of actions are expected from China, not Canada. Trudeau also single-handedly ruined faith in the crowdfunding websites by stopping $10 million raised for the protests on GoFundMe. Later, another crowdfunding website, Give Send Go, from which the protesters collected $8.5 million, was mysteriously hacked by we don't know who. But the intention of the hack is as clear as day. That is to show to the world that the truckers' protest is not a people's protest, but a right-wing American-funded movement. Because of this hack, the issue is no longer about which ideology is supporting the protest. But the bigger issue now is that the trust of the good Samaritans of the world has been broken badly. Good people all over the world will now fear donating to their favorite cause digitally out of fear of being persecuted. And Justin Trudeau's actions has made it okay for democracies all over the world to financially target their citizens for protesting. In conclusion, I will only say that Justin Trudeau, despite being on the right side, has messed up so bad that he has damaged democratic values globally. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming over to my vlog. I will see you soon.